I didn't sharpen yesterday like I usually do because I wanted to do it in the video with you guys, because people have been asking. So I sharpen with a block of 2x4 and automotive sandpaper here. This is grits ranging from 400 to 3000. And I also use a dowel for the hook knife. And I like this system because it all fits into the bottom of my toolbox here. So everything I need to sharpen, for the most part, is here. And that keeps me from using the excuse of, oh, I don't have my stuff to sharpen. I don't have all that stuff that I need. And whenever I need to sharpen, I just sharpen. But typically, I sharpen once a week on Sundays, and so that works out to about every 10 to 20 spoons, depending on the week, and depending on sort of what has happened, I'll do more or less sharpening. So I'll get into that in just a second. So now I'm picking out the sandpaper I want to use. I have a whole mix in here, but generally I like to use 400 grit, 800 grit, 1500, and then 3000. And then when you buy the mix pack, they send you a whole bunch of in-between grits as well, which I use sometimes, but not always. So the key with sharpening, let me grab a sheet of paper. The key with sharpening I've found is, let's assume that we're just talking about a rounded over edge. What happens over time is that the edge becomes rounded like this, right? And so this is the sloyd bevel here, this is the back spine of the blade here, and you can see it's rounded. Obviously this blunt tip here is if you were to look at it under a magnifying glass. Now what happens as you shave off bits of metal with the sandpaper is that you get down further and further into that bit, but you can see how if we were to magnify this bit here, it would still be rounded because we haven't gone all the way back to the point where we reach a true triangle. So until you go back to that point where it is a true triangle, you haven't gone far enough. And there is no point in leaving your lowest grit, your 400 or whatever it is you use as your lowest, until you have pushed these edges back to the point where there is no longer any rounded section at the top, where it is a true triangle. Now, the easiest way I know of to see whether you still have a triangle left, to see whether you still have a rounded bit left at the edge, is to hold your knife so that it's catching some sunlight and slowly twist it back and forth and get it to a point where all of the sloyd bevel is in shade, and then get it to a point where all of it is in light. And somewhere between the two, right at the edge where it's flashing between shade and light, when the sloyd bevel is all in shade, if you see a very fine flash of light at the edge right before it flashes to light, that's an indication that you have this rounded over bit right here at the tip that's catching the light before the rest of the sloyd bevel is. And so that's the sign that you have that rounded over bit. It's very, 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 very thin. It's right at the edge. I can't actually show you, but it's just this fraction of a line right at the edge. So that's what you're looking for. And you want to make sure that you keep going with the lowest grit until that is completely gone. So I'm just going to do it in real time the way I do it. I take the sandpaper, I wrap it around the block. I like to use the narrow edge because that way I can push up with my palm and pull down with my fingers and get it nice and tight along the top of the block. Obviously there's still a little bit of an air pocket there, but it's not like that. It's like that, right? Hi everyone. You're a little far away today for me to see comments, so if you write comments, make them long comments that they're obvious to me. Um, okay, so then I clamp this elbow into my side and I start doing my passes. Now, the thing to notice about my passes is, let's see if I can tilt it down a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm always leading with the handle, so the handle's pointing in the direction that I'm going. So if I'm coming towards me, the handle is closer to me, and if I'm going away from myself, the handle's further away from myself. And I always start here and go to the tip. Now, this elbow's clamped into my side, and when I'm coming towards myself, I can see the bevel on the sandpaper, and I can see if it is truly flat on the sandpaper. When I'm going away from myself, I can't see it. You guys can see it, and I can see it here. But so what I do is I put this finger right on the sloyd bevel. If the finger is back on the sloyd bevel, it's actually off, you see? So it has to be forward enough that it rocks it forward, just like that. So with my finger on that sloyd bevel, I then push forward. Now as I get to this part where the blade is slightly curved, I have to make a conscious effort to kind of lift up this hand here and tilt forward just a little bit. The reason for sharpening in the direction of the blade as opposed to pulling away from the blade to create the burr. It's what I saw Robin Wood doing, and so I started doing it, and it seemed to make sense. I'm starting to explore stropping a little more, and I believe stropping, for the most part, you go away from the edge, but I found this to be very effective going towards the edge, and that way it doesn't create a burr. The burr gets carried off. I mean, it just doesn't create a burr because you're going into the edge. So here's what it looks like, and in real time, it looks like this. Now, again, as I get to this part right here, I need to make sure that I'm keeping that edge engaged. It's easier to do when you're coming towards yourself. Unfortunately, the edge that really matters is the one that's pushing away from yourself, so you have to be good. A lot of times people drop their hand like this, so you gotta keep it level. But then if you just keep it totally level, you'll actually disengage from the edge right at the tip. So you need to do more than just keep it level. You need to almost rock into it, just a fraction, just like that. And so go back and forth like this. And how long you have to do this with that lowest grit really depends on in what sort of shape your blade is in. So by doing it every week, it really doesn't take long for me to get back to a place of sharpening. I don't have to, a place of having a true triangle, and I don't have to remove much metal. Part of the reason why I'm excited about learning about stropping is I want to be able to have an informed opinion for my students, but I also am excited about the prospect of stropping. So I'm checking the flash of light now, and I can see, I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see it. There's this tiny little flash of light. Let's get it to focus. Come on, focus, focus, focus. Yeah, I can't get it to show it, but there's this tiny little flash of light from here up to here. So sometimes the flash of light is, often it's not along the entire blade. As you get further along, it is just on a part of it, and usually it's just the tip. I did get a set of Tom strops. That's exactly what I'm using. Yeah, so but this is, I literally haven't, they arrived the other day, I haven't used them yet, so this is exciting for me. So you just want to keep going until you can see from the scratch pattern on the blade and from flashing it in the light that it is, you are back to a true single bevel. So I can see that the tip is just a little bit not quite on the same plane as the rest of the blade. Okay, so here we go. So once you get this motion locked into place, it really doesn't take long. And I like to alternate sides with this process just so that the edge doesn't wander off of that bit of hard steel in the middle of the steel sandwich. And I do find that maybe once every 6 months or so, I need to take the blades to a diamond plate. To reflatten the bevels. So the other side is totally fine. So now I'm just pushing a few more on this side to try and get that tip. I'm really paying attention to keeping that tip engaged right as it's at the right as it's at there. So just like that. Depending on how long I'm doing this, I might find it advantageous to shuffle around to a fresh section of sandpaper. Just like that. This style of sharpening is what I teach people in my lessons also. I find it's a great way for people to get comfortable with the knives, and also probably the most important skill that will get them success in spoon carving is the ability to get their knives sharper than how they arrive from the factory. So I know that was a problem for me for a couple of years until I came across Robin's videos and then devised this method that's kind of a variation on that. Okay, so now we have a true bevel on both there. So I'm using, this was the 400 grit. Now I'm going to go up to the 800 grit. And as you start walking up the grits, it's just about replacing the larger scratch pattern with the finer scratch pattern. So it takes 10, maybe 15 strokes per side, depending on how big an interval you're stepping up, to replace the one scratch pattern with the other. And one of the things that's nice about these handles that have actual bevels on the side is that, unlike a Mora, which has a pea pod grip, where depending on where your fingers are, it can feel really different as an angle. Because my thumb is at the same, it's on that bevel every single time. It feels the same every single time, even if I'm off by a millimeter here or there in terms of where it actually is. And so I'm able to get that muscle memory of what's the angle I'm really looking for much more cleanly. Okay, so now I can go up to 1500. Yeah, and really you can tell when a knife needs to be sharpened. For me, the biggest tell of a knife needing to be sharpened is when I have trouble cleaning up the neck of a spoon, when it has trouble exiting the grain that way. Usually use water stones, but you've piqued my interest. You'll try this and watch Robin's videos as well. Yeah, Robin uses sticky back sandpaper that he sticks to MDF that then is either clamped in a vise or on a workbench. And I had trouble finding sticky back sandpaper that was cheap. Like, you had to buy a big roll, and I wasn't quite sure what grits to use, and I didn't want to spend a couple $100 just to get a couple of years supply of sandpaper. So a mix pack like this from Amazon is $12, and comes with quite a lot. So, and then this block was just part of my kid's building block set, and it's worked well. You want to avoid using the wide side because guaranteed your fingers are going to stick up above that edge at some point, and you'll end up cutting them. So by having it like this, you both can push up with your palm, which makes it easier on your hands. And also you can make sure that your fingers and thumb are below that edge. So as you get to these higher grits, and the action of the sandpaper smooths out and becomes smoother and smoother, you have to pay attention to your form, because you won't get the same auditory and sensory cues if you go off of the bevel that you've created. Because once you've established that bevel with the lower grits, if while you're still on the lower grits you go off of it, you immediately feel it. It feels like you're driving along on a road and all of a sudden you go off the shoulder of the road. With these lower grits, everything is so smooth that you really don't feel it. And so you have to pay attention to your form. Otherwise, if you're sloppy with your form, you'll end up basically, not hitting all the way to the edge, and you'll end up creating a secondary bevel. So now I'm at 3,000. Very good. So I'm going to try stropping with Tom Strop, but I don't have... I thought I had some metal polish kicking around from when I used to strop just on a wood block, this wood block here. But I don't seem to have any, so I need to buy some Tormek paste. So I'm just going to practice using the smooth leather strop, which I know isn't ideal. You want to start with the suede and then work your way up to the smooth leather strop. But I figure it's just me practicing the form. Okay. So again, as I'm coming towards me, my thumb is here on the handle, and I'm watching to make sure that that edge is fully engaged. And then as I'm going away from myself, my finger is actually pressing down on that sloyd bevel, and that way I can feel it engaged the entire time. And I'm going towards the edge, towards the cutting edge each time, and I'm leading with the handle. So the handle is always angled in the direction that I'm going in. And that helps me make a smooth arc in that direction. So now I find that this right here where I'm at, 3,000 grit, that gives me a perfectly wonderful cutting edge. I'm totally happy with the quality of the surface that creates. And I'm excited to see if, largely I want to have an informed opinion about stropping, but I'm also excited to see if stropping, if I strop between every spoon or at the end of every day, if that will make it so that I can sharpen less often. So Tom's strops come in these lovely cases that keeps everything clean as your strops get covered with stuff. And I got the suede and the hard leather. They also use this as the backing. And my understanding, this is gonna have to be a little bit of, so my understanding is these are non-skid enough that you use both hands and you actually pull away from the edge, and I have to figure out the amount of pressure that works in terms of not dragging it along the surface. All right. I'm used to applying a certain amount of pressure, and I'm going away from the edge. So the question really is, oh yeah, you can see that that's polishing up the edge quite a bit more. I'm not getting full engagement on the bevel, largely because I'm still figuring out what the angle feels like. And the thing I'll be curious about is when I start carving. Am I carving today? Check my schedule. Yeah, I'm carving one thing today. So I'm curious to see how this feels compared to what I'm used to. Okay, good. So I believe the trick with stropping is to do it a fair amount, so more than the 10 or 12 strokes. Tom describes doing, I forget how many, he has instructions, but I think 20 strokes per side, so I'm going to have to get used to that. And in the meantime, so don't take this as an example of how to strop. This is just me trying these for the very first time. If you want some great examples of how to strop, go to Tom Scandian's Spoon Carving with Tom's website. Now I'm going to move on to sharpening my main hook knife. So this is the Nadnock hook. It's what I do the vast majority of my spoon carving with. I have some other hooks from Matt that I use for doing the finishing cuts on certain shapes, but this one does basically everything. So again, depending on how much material you want to remove, you can go back to the 400, or you can do less. In this case, the hook knife does a lot less work than the sloyd knife. So in this case, I'm going to go to 800 grit because I don't think there's actually a secondary bevel on it. What am I getting here? And you want a dowel. For a hook knife like this, you want a dowel that is smaller than the diameter of the hook knife, right? So you can see it fits within there. And I like to put that block on my knee, and then get this out of the way. And then I rest this here. Now the key is that this can wiggle around a bit. And the reason you want that, as Matt so brilliantly pointed out, is that once you lay this dowel flat on those two tracks, those two shiny tracks, you can feel if it is firmly engaged on both. Whereas if I lock this down by bracing this so that it can't wiggle really, then I can feel when it's engaged, but I then have to get the dowel perfectly... Telephone, let me see who it is. There we go. Hi, Mom. Can I call you back in a second? Okay, bye. Okay, so if the knife is braced, then you have to be perfect with your alignment of the dowel. If the knife is allowed to move, then the dowel will sort of cling to it. Even as it rocks back and forth, you will feel it engage, and it doesn't matter if the knife moves at all, and you're more likely to stay truly on those tracks. So you can see I'm doing a twist and also a push. So I'm doing a sort of a twisty push that goes from the back to the front. You don't want to do just a twist, because that puts the grit scratch pattern lined up with the blade edge. So you want there to be as much sort of motion in this direction as possible. You want to go from one edge of the sandpaper to the other edge, and you want to feel that it is firmly engaged on those two tracks every time. So the way to tell if you've gone far enough with this is whether it raises a burr on the back side. There's so many ways of sharpening, and everyone has their own style. The truth is that sharp is sharp. There are many different ways to achieve that geometric shape of a true triangle, or a blade that has two planes that are coming to a true edge. And any way that gets you there, that works for you, is really all that matters. The trick is finding a way that works for you that allows you to do it consistently and easily and hopefully inexpensively. Okay, so now I can feel on the back a very slight raised burr. I go just a little more, make sure it's all the way along the entire edge. If I want to engage more of the tip, I just raise the handle up a little bit, and that will naturally have more of my downward pressure engaged on this front half of the blade here. Okay, very nice. Now we'll move up in the sandpaper, 1500. The nice thing about using a dowel like this is that you end up using the bit of sandpaper that you can't use on the square block. It's the bit at the very end, and that is exactly the bit that gets used for this. So it's very efficient in terms of the use of sandpaper. You can use the same sandpaper you're using for your sloyd knife to do the hook. So again, 10 to 15 strokes, depending on how high a jump and grit you're going for, and you're feeling for that blade engagement, double engagement on both of those tracks with your dowel. You can feel it when it's off. What's that, Matt? The sharp is sharp. A highly convex edge can be perfectly sharp. That's true. That's true. I guess I meant if your knife is working, whatever way you got there to the point of it working is great and works for you. feel like sometimes people present sharpening techniques as the sharpening technique or the best way to do it. And I think the truth is that there's lots of different ways to do it. So, yeah, nice strong burr on that side. Let's move up to the 3000. Okay. So again, I find it helpful to have my hand palm up, and that way I get a nice strong grip without my wrist being kinked like that. True, some people do carving with convex sloyd knives. Yeah, so Matt's point is that the other thing that matters, let me draw this, the thing that matters just as much as having the true sharp point is having an edge that is bitey. And Matt did a great video on this on our Spoonosaurus page a while back, but over time, what often happens to your edge, because we are humans, is you end up with an edge like that, where the sides are slightly convex. Now, the problem with that is that when you are trying to cut with a knife like that, you might have used the strops and sandpaper to make an edge that doesn't have a secondary bevel, that is truly comes to a point, but it will still feel like it doesn't bite in the way you want it to. And what you need to do is push back those bevels to a true triangle again, because a true triangle will feel like it bites in at any angle. It wants to engage the wood at any angle, whereas one that has those convex sides, at a very steep angle, it will engage. But then as soon as you try and shallow out the angle and take a less aggressive bite, it almost wants to skip out of the wood or not engage at all, because the edge is actually lifted up off the wood just a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit. So that's a really good point that Matt makes, that there's two things you're going for. You're going for a true triangular edge, and you're going for flat bevels that will allow that edge to engage every time. And with hook knives, the same thing is true, but it's a little more complex to talk about, because what you want with hook knives is a shape, I think, Matt, tell me if I'm wrong about this, where it's flat on one side and then slightly curved on the outside so that it can curve through a cut like that. And depending on how curved this bottom is, and how that inside angle is angled in relation to the handle, can make a hook knife feel more or less aggressive, that it will start engaging the wood sooner, or at more of a steeper angle and want to come out sooner. So those are the variables that are being played with. So again, as the action smooths out, you want to check your form, make sure that you're really getting it just right. Good. Now Matt hates it when I do this, but I think it works quite well. Holding the hook knife right up in front of your eyes so you can see exactly when you are truly on the bevel. I use that same piece of sandpaper to remove the burr. And if you're paying attention, you can actually feel the burr come off. It feels like a little zip as it comes off. This is a motion that you do slowly. You do not want to do this fast. You want to be very careful that you're right on the edge, and that you are not rounding over the edge at all. Okay, now I also got the strop stick from Tom, and I'm gonna try using just the smooth leather one, because again, I don't have any stropping paste yet. So you want to do the same motion and maintain it on those 2 tracks the entire time. All right. So, and that didn't really raise any burr. We'll see when I start carving. If it feels off, then it probably raised a burr, but I don't think it did. I can't feel one with my fingers. So really, the point of a strop, as I understand it, is to polish the edge such that it leaves a very smooth finish, and also to somewhat reinforce a very sharp edge so that it stays strong even as it's going through the wood. Now the key to having a knife, what the heck am I going to do it anyways? The key to having a knife that stays strong all week, even if you're carving at this level, is to make sure you aren't carving wood that's too hard and dry, and to make sure that you aren't aggressively twisting. I mean, obviously a hook knife's designed to twist, but with a sloyd knife, you're using the tip of the knife quite a lot. And if you're really grinding it in, twisting it into, knotted wood, of course it's going to have problems and get slightly rounded, even if it doesn't chip or anything like that. The other most important thing is to always, always, always sheathe your blades. Even if you're just putting it down for a minute, put a sheath on it, because if you leave your knife floating around on the table, right, all you have to do, especially with a Mora that has those peapod handles, they want to spin like a top. And so you knock it with your elbow and it hits your coffee cup, and all of a sudden you got a ding in the blade where you didn't have to. So that's me sharpening. I'm going to do, how many more sloyds? I'll probably do 2 more sloyds and maybe touch up some of my other knives as well. Thanks so much, guys. If you have any questions, be in touch.